Hello, everyone. This is Dr. 𝘿𝙧 Performance Plus Physical Therapy, and it is Monday, 11th of May. Guys, I had a little bit of a technical difficulty. Chrome would not let me stream to Facebook, so that's the reason for the delay, so apologies about that. I hope everyone is doing well. How was the weekend, guys? Did everyone have a good weekend? Everyone have a good Mother's Day? I hope everything went really well this weekend. I'm just getting set up here on IG. Hey guys, hey 𝘿𝙧, how are you? Hey 𝑚𝑎 how are you? I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Guys on Facebook, how are you doing? It was a little bit of a challenge to get on Facebook today. For some reason, we were they wouldn't let me stream. So again, apologies for that. Guys, my name is Dr. 𝘿𝙧 Performance Plus Physical Therapy. This is Q&A with Dr. D. I have this every day in the afternoon. I usually will post about it, but I'll try to be consistent and see you guys around maybe 4 p.m. every day. This week, hi Arlene, how are you? This week, I'm talking about all things about the shoulder this week. And today's question is, why do I have pain when I reach for something overhead in my shoulder? Shoulder pain, guys, is something that's very frequent, that happens in maybe 30% of the population. It's a very frequent condition for people to have shoulder pain, specifically at the top part of the shoulder. This is a very common issue and very common injury that can happen. I'm going to talk about the injury or the condition that most frequently happens when you have pain on the top of your shoulder, okay? And that is something called impingement. And some of you may have heard of this. It's called impingement syndrome. And it's a term that we use that biomechanically describes when you lift your arm that something is getting pinched at the top of the shoulder. So to give you a little bit of an idea, a bit more of what this looks like, I'm going to show you guys a bit of a model. Okay. So right here on IG, guys, you can see this is a shoulder model. This is what it looks like. This is what your shoulder looks like. On Facebook, this is what it looks like. So if you guys take a quick look here, you guys can really see that the shoulder is a really interesting joint. You have this ball and socket area that sits right there where you have a very, very big ball and a very small socket. For IG, guys, you can see that a very, very small socket with a very, very big ball. And then you have this little shelf that sits on the top there, okay? So the ball and socket joint is called the glenohumeral joint. Glenoid being the socket, and the humeral meaning the humeral head or the top of this humerus bone. And then on the top part here, one part of the shoulder, that shelf that you look at that's right above that ball and socket is what we call the acromioclavicular joint, okay? Right up here. Hey, Niasha. All right. So guys, when you're looking at the shoulder, it really comprises of quite a bit of different moving parts. Okay. So we have that ball and socket or the glenohumeral joint. We have that shelf on the top, which is a acromioclavicular joint. We also have a couple of different components where we look at the sternoclavicular joint and also the scapulothoracic joint, which is where the shoulder blade lays on the rib cage. Okay. So when we're looking at the shoulder, there are a couple of moving parts that we're looking at, okay? Now, guys, when we're talking specific to shoulder impingement, hey, Joanne, hey, Elliot, how are you? Thank you for joining. All right, when we're looking at shoulder pain, guys, when we're lifting above our heads, you can see that shelf can cause a little bit of a problem if you're lifting overhead. So imagine that when you're reaching overhead, that ball and socket joint is going to glide and slide down in that socket. And if it's not moving far enough, you guys can see how it can actually hit the top of that shelf. Okay, for you guys on Facebook, hopefully you can see this. Again, if that ball and socket, when you lift your arm, that ball glides all the way down, there's a point where if it doesn't move in the right way, it can hit the top of the socket. Guys, when it hits the top of the socket, there are actually muscles and tendons and ligaments that move through that little area right there, which is called a subacromial space, okay? And if something hits that area, then you have what we call a mechanical pinch or what we classify as impingement. So it usually presents itself that you cannot reach above 90 degrees. And you can see that I'm lifting my arm here. You can't lift your arm above 90 degrees before you start getting into that mechanical pinch. So the way that you would notice if you are having pain is, let's say you're reaching overhead into your cupboard to try and pull something down, you're trying to put some heavy bags away in a cupboard, or you're lifting some pots up, or maybe even if you're lifting something really, really heavy and you get to just about here, you'd notice that you start having pain right at the top. When things get really exciting, as I call it, meaning that it gets very, very inflamed and very, very irritated, you can start having radiating pain down the arm. We talked quite a bit about that last week in terms of what that radiating pain can be. One of those things that can happen from the shoulder is actually a pinch of that mechanical pinch is happening that can cause that radiating pain down the arm. Okay. So the muscle that usually gets impinged when we talk about mechanical impingement is called the supraspinatus muscle. And it's a muscle that is part of the rotator cuff. I'm pretty sure everyone has heard about that. Now, that muscle typically has a very poor blood supply. And for that reason, it's very difficult for it to heal when it starts getting injured. So you can see, guys, from a biomechanical standpoint, that muscle, that tendon, as it goes through that subacromial space, or that small shelf, as you see there, doesn't have a lot of space. Okay, so if it's getting very pinched, and this is very common with overhead athletes, people who play tennis, people who play volleyball, if they're getting that mechanical pinch every single time that they lift their arm overhead, even basketball players also, you can see where they can start getting a lot of pain, a lot of swelling, and anytime they try to lift their arm, they can start getting into trouble. So you can have anything in that situation, from an injury or what we call mechanical impingement, or it can start progressing into something way more involved, where you can start getting a rotator cuff tear or injury to the actual, hey Jason, baseball pitcher, that's right. You can start getting some sort of tear into that supraspinatus muscle, where you're doing that motion over and over again. If things get really involved, you can have a complete tear of your rotator cuff in different places, and that is usually the starting point of stuff. Impingement, guys, is usually the doorway, or what I call the doorway diagnosis, for a lot of different crazy dysfunctions that has happened with the shoulder. Jason says it's bothered me for a long time. Yep, it can be something that really bothers you for a long time. Guys, if you don't correct the mechanics of why that mechanical pinch is happening every time that you lift your shoulder, then this is something that can definitely turn into a chronic condition. So that's the mechanics, and that's the basis of impingement syndrome. Again, if you lift up over your head and you notice that once you get to about this level, about shoulder height, you're feeling pain right at the top of the shoulder, there's a good chance that you have some impingement going on that you want to see a physical therapist for. So for that reason, in terms of things that you guys can do in the meantime, so you're feeling this pain, what do I do? There are ways that you can modify your activities and modify your range so that you're not getting into that mechanical pinch every single time you lift your arm overhead. For example, if you're in the kitchen and you're putting things away and you're short like I am, I'm about 5'4", and you find yourself having to reach up into really high cupboards, what you can do is you can step on something, step on it to a stair, a movable step, that you can now work at this level versus working at this level. Okay, so you just have to try and change your mechanics a bit and change your environment so it allows you to not work at that level. For the guys that are baseball pitchers like Jason, or overhead athletes, tennis players, volleyball players, this is something that you probably want to adjust sooner than later. Get a physical therapist to get some eyes on your shoulder, get a good evaluation, and also start getting some care so that you can get out of that chronic situation, because you guys hang out here way more often than the average person. So it's something that you really want to get medical attention on right away. Again, as I said, impingement is a gateway diagnosis for a lot of different injuries that happens with the shoulder. Anything from rotator cuff tears, biceps tendonitis, bursitis. There's so many other different things. You can also even start getting into labral tears. It's a mechanical issue that is relatively easy to correct. You want to adjust it right away before it starts getting into that chronic situation. Okay, Damon, hey Damon, how are you? Damon says, great info, I got a snapping sensation. Yep, if those muscles get super tight, Damon, as you're reaching overhead, or if even if you're doing your dance motions, because I know you're a dancer, if you're doing a lot of those motions, or you're going through your port de bras, those muscles are super tight, you're going to start shifting the mechanics of that shoulder. As I showed you in that picture, I'm just going to pull it up again. All right, in that picture, the mechanics of the shoulder is pretty delicate, okay? With a shift of just maybe 1 centimeter, you're gonna get a very different sensation in terms of your ability to move your arm freely up and down. And for the guys that are on, I'd like you to test this right now. This is an example of how just even changing your posture can change how easy it is for your shoulder to move through those mechanics. So right now I'm sitting up relatively nice and tall. I want you to go into a nice slouch position where you are. You can do this sitting or standing, it doesn't matter. Okay, so slouch all the way down, you know, your neck is forward, your shoulders are curved over, and try to lift your arm in front of you, okay, in that position. Try to lift it to the side, and just pay attention, do it a couple of times, and pay attention to how it feels. How difficult it is, what muscles feel tight, what muscles feel weird, okay? And now, let's change that. Sit up nice and tall, okay? Proper posture, you guys know what this is. Make sure your shoulders are in line with your hips, ears over your shoulders, and then repeat the same exact thing. And how different does that feel? Okay, if you've tried it, you know this feels very different. The reason why it feels different is because in that slouch position, you're actually now closing down on that subacromial space, okay? And you're biasing your shoulders and closing down on the correct mechanics of that joint. So that joint now doesn't have as much space to move. So it's a lot harder for your muscles to lift your arm through that motion, okay? That's why it feels so much better when you sit up. And that's why your posture is so important in terms of the mechanics of the rest of the upper body and the trunk. Okay, so again, yes, Damon, in terms of getting a snapping sensation, your muscles are working way harder when it's in the wrong biomechanical position. Your joints are designed to work in a specific optimal situation, and anytime those joint mechanics change, the muscles that have to be engaged in order for you to perform your normal motion is going to change, and you're going to find that you're having difficulty and eventually some sort of injury. It seems like things are now starting to give you a little bit of attention in terms of snapping sensations or tightness or a little bit of pain. It does progress over time if you do not reverse those things. Okay, I'm just going to check Instagram, guys. I see that quite a bunch of people are on. Comment live if you're here live. Drop me a question if you have a question for me about shoulder pain. And I'm just going to check Instagram in the meantime. Arlene says, boom, left side acted up 2 weeks ago now before it was a right. So great class. Yeah, so guys that have intermittent pain going from the right to the left, that's also actually not uncommon. It's pretty common for people to have pain on one side and going to the other side. The reason for that is, guys, again, your body's designed to work in symmetry. If you have pain on one side, chances are it's going to start creating some sort of dysfunction in terms of muscle symmetry that's eventually going to affect the other side. It usually manifests itself a lot more in the lower extremity, but it's not uncommon that if you have a wonky shoulder on the right, that all of a sudden that you have some pain and weird stuff happening in the left or even going up to the neck. That's not uncommon at all. Okay, I'm going to check IG. Oh, hey Journey, how are you? Arlene, did you have another question for me regarding that? I'm just going to check Facebook in the meantime. Hey, Miss Dibs, how are you? Any questions for me? Drop it in the comments. Seems like IG is acting up a bit for some people. So I'll wait just a few more minutes for Miss Arlene. Okay. All right. Arlene says she'll chat later with me. Okay. All right, Facebook guys. Any other questions about that in terms of impingement? So I'll wait a couple of a minute or two for you guys to drop any comments or any questions that you may have. Again, to review, guys, any pain that you have on the lateral part or the outside part of your shoulder, chances are, specifically when you're lifting overhead, and by lifting overhead, we're talking about anything past 90 degrees, If you have any problems with that, there's a good chance that you may have something called impingement syndrome, which is the biomechanical description of a change mechanics of the glenohumeral joint, or that ball and socket joint that sits on the shoulder. When you lift up and you bring in your arm up over your head, once it gets to 90 degrees, if it does not clear that shelf on the top of your shoulder, again, I'll bring up my model. If it does not clear that shelf on the top of your shoulder, which is called a acromioclavicular joint, or the subacromial space, you will find that there is an issue. You start getting mechanical pinching of the structures that lie in between that subacromial space, which usually is the supraspinatus tendon. Some of the lateral deltoid muscles also can start getting inflamed, along with the bursa that lays in that area. And because of that, every time that you lift above your head 90 degrees, you start getting pain at the side of the shoulder. Something that can be easily changed and addressed with a physical therapy consult and treatment. So make sure that if you guys are having that, you definitely want to go through and make sure that you are doing things to modify in the meantime, so you're not consistently aggravating it. Make sure that you can modify. Try not to reach overhead if you're in a situation where you're short like me. Stand on a step in order to reach things and make things more accessible to you, so you're working and lifting in this range versus this range. For overhead people who live in this area, overhead athletes, volleyball players, baseball players, tennis, you need to get that checked out sooner than later. It can get chronic, and it gets way more exciting in terms of just pain when you lift your arm. So you really want to make sure that you get that addressed. Impingement syndrome really can be a gateway for a lot of bigger injuries or diagnoses that can happen with the shoulder. So you want to get that addressed as soon as you can. All right. So that's all that I have for you guys today in terms of impingement syndrome. Meet me back here tomorrow. I'll try to make it consistent around 4 p.m. Getting a little bit of a groove here so I can get some more guys and communicate with you guys more. Dr. 𝘿𝙧, Performance Plus Physical Therapy. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.